Thanks for joining me for part two. Where we left off at the end of part one was with all the main level track work down and tested. Trains had been run on all four tracks simultaneously. Where you see the blue tape is there, that marks where a 20-foot long backdrop was going to be in the future, which would then hide these staging or storage tracks to the right. And we'll have a look now at what the staging tracks do. This is a train leaving the main line. We have capacity for as many as 17 trains. Train re-entering the main line there. The layout was designed for the main tracks to disappear unobtrusively into tunnels with a little bit of misdirection above them too, so that the train can just run through the scene once without doubling back on a loop somewhere that's visible. And then with all these storage tracks, you can run a procession of trains at whatever pace seems best. So now this takes us through the staging tracks. And then as things slim back down to the four main tracks, we come around to actually when you're standing in front of the layout, this is going to be the left tunnel here. I did work from a pencil-drawn track plan for both levels, but it was a little bit loose so that I could lay things out, do sort of a mock-up. This bridge coming around from a hill where local freight could tuck into a small tunnel, and then upper-level industrial tracks, the Erdl Freight House that was going to be built. Just laid the tracks out, wanted them to be as different as possible from the straight main line, curving, lumpy, weed-grown, industrial. And then this was my first chance to test those two tracks to the right of the main line, which were going to be completely hidden behind scenery. So the tracks here are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4 from the outside in, which has no correspondence to the actual track numbering on the northeast quarter, but it's just a way to keep easy track of it. And then the tracks over in the storage area there, staging area coming from the outside, 1A, 1B, 1C, and so on. This is track 4D, the innermost one, and it splits into two, so you have the opportunity to store two longer trains than can be run from the other tracks in the back, which have a maximum of 12 feet, which seems like a lot, but you want to have the option to run a longer train or two. And you just tuck that in and park it till it's needed. The next task, and probably the most time-consuming of building the whole layout, was to cover. Here you see the rear view of the left-hand tunnel coming around the corner. This is the bigger area of what would be the two tunnels to go into staging. So now we are starting to lay down the platforms for the end that will cover the tunnels, but those will be ultimately removed once they're all lined up and set, because each of these areas that will be in a tunnel will have to be ballasted, it will have to be enclosed, and then very importantly, to me anyway, the light inside the tunnels will be minimized to the greatest degree possible, because it's much nicer to have the train just disappear in there and it'll be absolutely black inside the tunnel. You don't see any of the workings behind. It also requires a lot of testing. Make sure the catenary lines up with the pantograph shoes on all trains, all different types of electric locomotives. So it's worth taking the time to test these, because once they're covered under a tunnel, that's it. Unless some major disaster happens, you're not going to be removing that upper level. Now it was time to start building the supporting framework for these boards. Those had just been resting on some skinny boxes in the previous photos. So the whole support thing is built in there, and then the boards for the middle part, all this designed to be taken apart, the layout, into 6 pieces in case we ever had to move. Now you can see where those two storage loops for long freights to the right of the main line, those are going to be hidden tucked under the upper level and then hidden completely by scenery. In this case, by where those white boxes are, there's going to be a retaining wall. It's always a good idea, in my opinion, to do a mock-up of tunnels. You can see exactly where you want to put it, and then just stand back and run trains for a little bit and get a good idea of what that's going to look like, to allow for a little bit of curve, which is a great thing to be able to see. In the event, I think I moved the tunnel up a little bit further when I built it with the actual wood. And you can see that here. It's a little bit further forward. Same thing here. These panels are going to be removed. For now, there's some tracks laid out. You can see that mock-up cardboard on the right. There's going to be a power plant there, and then all these coal hoppers. Storage tracks will be there, like so. And a coal dumper will be scratch built to the right. And here's what the main line looks like going into it. Moments like this, I'd like to step back and just take a wider view of the whole 2/10 of a mile here or so, scale mile, of main line represented. The tunnels are still wide open, and you can sort of see here that it shows you can see clearly everything going on in the back of the staging, and I did not want that. So darkening those tunnels was going to be very important. Also, a commercially bought tunnel portal, just none would fit here. So I knew I'd have to scratch build my own. First scratch building project I ever did on a railroad, and these are just mock-ups, cardboard mock-ups for each end that I made. They have to be taller than the usual portal because of the wire height. It's also really helpful, in my opinion, to build something I did for each end that blocks the light. So you're going to have very little light coming in from the back or the sides. In part one of the video, I covered a little bit how you do the ballast and how you spray adhesive on it after it's been sculpted with a dry brush and so forth. Put the catenary masts in there at the exact spot they need to be. Since this is going to be covered up more or less permanently, you want to make sure that the part that's in the tunnel is really solid, because it would be a catastrophe if you had to try to go in there and fix something after the wood platform is screwed down and you're putting scenery on and so forth. Some weeds, I'd make those look a little bit better, and then finally, after a lot of time spent with the dry brush sculpting that ballast, I sprayed the adhesive down and cleaned the rail tops, fixed the weeds up just a little bit. Now in the tunnel itself, I would have on the walls on either side black felt, again to minimize the light. I want this to be mysterious, looking like the train's going to some unknown distance through that tunnel. And the further back, obviously, since it's going to be mostly dark in there, you don't need as much detail. And in the back part of this tunnel, I actually put black ballast just to try to, again, soak up as much light as possible and have this be a mysterious void in there. And the next part would be the wires. I love straight wires on a curve, the catenary wires. In the tunnel, as the radius, it's kind of a trade secret. You tighten the curves inside the tunnel itself, and you can actually bend this old style Märklin catenary wire with your hands and make it fit the curve, which is great for the pantograph shoes to not slip off the wire. Little homage to one of my favorite paintings. And yes, even though we just have a mock-up for the tunnel entrance, look how nice and dark that is in there. That's what I'm talking about. I won't take you through the left-hand tunnel because it is just the same as the right-hand tunnel, but much longer job because it's a bigger, longer tunnel. And then it was time to start thinking about scratch building the tunnel portals. Never really scratch built anything before, but I just got some artboard and I just gave it a try. I used a flower pot upside down to make the curve, trace that. And here's the unpainted version with little retaining walls on the side. I used some Krylon spray paint too that look quite gray on the cap in the store. Looks a little bit bluer to me here. See, it looks quite gray in the sun also. No big deal. There's a slight blue tinge to it. I may use some darkening agent to cover that up. But here it is in place, and this was about a 13-foot retaining wall. And remember what's behind there are those 2 extra long storage loops for freight trains. I just used 1x6 and strip wood. The idea was to make it the same color as the small retaining walls by the tunnel portals. And then I had to remove it, paint it, put it back in place, and once that was done, again, time to step back and just run trains for a little bit to just kind of get an overview, make sure it was what I wanted before I went on. Some weeds, some ivy on there that are going to have to be improved and run up and over the lip into the scenery for the upper level. But so far I felt I could work with it. And now, in case you are wondering what the Eastport Tower title for the layout came from, this is the classic New Haven Railroad pagoda roof interlocking tower. I modeled it pretty closely to the one in Devon, Connecticut in Milford, but it's much less bright looking than this. Even by the 60s it was very, very weathered and dilapidated. So the ground floor of it had the windows all boarded up. So I used ice cream sticks, painted up to be weather-beaten boards. Kind of did the aged concrete look on the whole building, although I'll warn you it looks all too blindingly bright here. I had yet to weather it, which you'll see in the final video over the end credits. But anyway, there's the boarded up portion and the window frames and actually our window panes in there. I will have to build an interior for this because it's right at the front of the layout, but haven't gotten to that yet. The roof looks absolutely glossy and gleaming, but I put lots of weathering powder, gray and brown and stuff on there, as you'll see again in that final clip on this video. But it was great to see it there. That's the reason to call this layout Eastport Tower, because that was the nerve center of this interlocking with all these switches, the hydraulic levers that would be pulled from within the tower there to move trains from one track onto the next at speed. So that was a nice stopping point here. I'd had this in my mind's eye the whole time as I planned and worked on the layout, and now I got to run trains past it for the first time. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching. The next part to cover scenery and moving on into the upper level switching tracks. And I will look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks.